Good evening, all. My name is Talha Köse. I am the director of SETA Brussels office. So I would like to welcome all of you on behalf of SETA Foundation. So Libya is a significant issue and important developments are happening in the country. So after a series of talks, dialogues and negotiations, Libya Political Dialogue Forum set for a transition government that will take the country to elections on December 2021. Of course, the country have gone through a revolution 10 years ago, exactly on the February 10 years ago. And in 2014, there was a civil war which devastated the country. And external actors have involved in Libyan affairs. So Turkey, Egypt, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Russia, France, Italy, Germany, and US, all these actors have been involved in the process. So we've been following the developments in Libya closely because it is connected to security of Europe. It is related to Eastern Mediterranean geopolitics. It is also related to security of Sub-Saharan Africa migration issue. So Libya also have its own resources and it has a rich culture and there are unfulfilled expectations of the people who struggled for democracy in their countries. So the future of country is still not clear. So there are optimistic versus pessimistic remarks on the political process in Libya. So what we're going to do today is to reflect on the current transition government and how it may shape the future of Libyan politics, what may be some of the risks involved in this spectrum. So as SETA Foundation, we published a couple of books, analysis and journals. Two of the important work were related to countering violent extremism in Libya and security sector reform in Libya. In addition to these, we have been continuing to do some panels, expert discussions. So we will be continue to commit to discussions and debates with regard to friendly country, Libya. So we're hoping to see a more stable situation in Libya. So we have 4 very important scholars, experts who are following the country closely. So today we will start with Claudio Gazzini. So Claudio Gazzini is International Crisis Group's consulting analyst for Libya. She has covered this role since 2012. So she has been involved as a policy advisor to Ghassan Salameh. He used to be the special representative of the United Nations support mission in Libya. So she has been publishing widely on the issue and she has a really interesting opinion and analysis last week. So she will start discussing the issue and try to reflect also on the differences between the earlier processes and the current process. So she needs to leave a little bit early. So we will try to save some questions after the presentation. So Claudio, welcome, and the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me here in this webinar. It's always a pleasure. So let's start by saying what has happened, first of all. So the UN has brokered a political dialogue, has hosted a political dialogue for the past few months, a dialogue that was aimed at creating a new interim government that could unify Libya, a country divided since 2014 into 2 parallel governments, each controlling different parts of the country, one in Tripoli and one in the east, 2 parallel military coalitions and financial institutions. Now, when the UN tried to kick off this political dialogue, which started in November on the heels of the truce and the end of the fighting in the war in Tripoli. I wouldn't have bet 2 cents on this process. I thought it was going to fail and that it wouldn't lead to any consensus. But I'm rather upbeat now on the process. And having covered Libya, as you mentioned, having covered Libya since 2012, what I see today is much more positive dynamics, a much more constructive attitude of the Libyan politicians and military elites, if you want, as well, compared to where we were in 2015 and even 2017. So let me explain what we have today. So at this UN dialogue that matured, ended on the 5th of February with the selection of Prime Minister designate Abdelhamid Beiba and a 3-member presidency council headed by Mohamed Nefi and two others, one from the south and one from Western Libya. We saw something that was rather unusual. So we saw, first of all, the other candidates that had been running for these positions. It was sort of an open competition. It was any Libyan who had endorsements from 2 out of the 74 members of this UN-backed forum could run for this competition. There were over 20 candidates for the prime minister position, 20 candidates for the presidential council position. And in a very sort of, I call it nail-biting sort of selection process or internal election process in this forum, these 4 men I just mentioned were selected. But the openness of the process, the fact that it was televised, live broadcasted, sort of created participation from Libyans that could follow the proceedings. But what was unprecedented, I think, was that the candidates that ran for these positions all conceded at the end of this internal voting week. They all conceded, they all congratulated the so-called winners, even though the winners had won just by a slim majority. It was a race that ended with 39 votes in favor of this closed list with this PM candidate and the members of the Presidency Council. They won with 39 votes over 74, so over a very slight majority, but still a majority. Importantly, Aguila, who was running, Aguila Saleh, head of the House of Representatives, conceded defeat. Fatih Bashaga, who was also running in this competing list, conceded defeat. Sarraj, the current premier, acknowledged the result of the vote and said he's welcoming these new transitional authorities. So this response of the political elite was, to me, constructive and very different than what I heard in 2015, back in the days of the Skhirat agreement, the other UN-backed deal, because at the time, really, it was palpable that there was going to be a complete refusal by the eastern constituencies and politicians there, and the budding sort of what then became the Libyan National Army. It was palpable that they were going to refuse this UN-backed deal. Attitudes now are completely different. So even in the East, now these new sort of elected interim leaders were welcome. We saw the PM designate go to the East, go to Tobruk. We saw the Eastern representative, Mohamed Nefi, travel to the East, although he's not at all a Haftar supporter. Rather, he belongs intellectually and politically more to the anti-Haftar constituencies based in Tripoli. He was welcome in the East. He dictated the terms of his meeting with Haftar, so not at Rejma, but in a hotel in Benghazi. All very sort of surprising dynamics for who has been following Libya for all these years. So I think all of this promises well. Of course, the next big hurdle is going to be getting a vote of confidence for the government presented. Let's remember that the roadmap envisages, I mean, these elected officials are just designate, PM designate, and Presidential Council designate. The roadmap envisages that they have to receive a vote of confidence for the cabinet that is presented by the HOR. They have until this Thursday to present the cabinet list, and then 21 days for the HOR to approve it. If the House of Representatives does not meet or fails to reach a quorum or does not approve the cabinet presented, the matter goes back to the UN-backed dialogue forum, and they will have the final say on how to proceed. But as we at Crisis Group called for a meeting in CERT for the House of Representatives, I'm very sort of glad to read today that this idea of convening a session of the parliament in CERT seems to be going forward. It has received the okay of the joint 5+5 military committee. And so I think there is a possibility that we might see an HOR session. Of course, the problems are always the same. We hear of parliamentarians that are still bartering or bargaining their attendance to this session in exchange of concessions by the newly elected leaders that are seeking for a vote of confidence. And so, of course, there's always the risk that if their requests are not delivered on, then we might not see this session materialize. I very much hope that's not the case. But let's say the truth also, that various parties have an interest in making this session materialize. Why do I say that? I say that, first of all, because there are financial reasons as well. The East-based authorities and its sort of separate government, which is the non-internationally recognized one, actually wants, in theory, for this government to be approved, because once there is this government approval, we're going to see a unified budget be implemented. That means that the expenses of the East-based government get covered by a unified budget taken over by the authorities in Tripoli. And this is a big incentive because they've been funding themselves for the past 5 years independently through treasury bills and a system that has created sort of side effects and problems. So this is sort of an important incentive. For authorities in Tripoli also, there's an incentive to get this government approved because, as you know, oil revenues that come from the exports of Libya's hydrocarbon production are currently being seized in an account owned by Libya's National Oil Corporation. And the agreement, a very informal and an informal, so there's no written text on this agreement, but an agreement backed by the US and the UN, envisages that these funds will be released, so put at the automatic disposal of the government and of the central bank, only once there is a government of national unity approved. So this is what I call sort of a carrot that is also very appealing for the authorities in Tripoli to approve. And finally, I think the international, so aside from the financial sort of component, I think even the internationals and the international protagonists involved in the Libya conflict are signaling that they want a new phase really to start. And I think what is most remarkable is the endorsement of Egyptian President Sisi to the PM designate. Dbeiba was in Cairo, there was an official meeting, phone calls were made. And I say surprising because as far as we know, Dbeiba, traditionally his political alliances would be closer to Ankara, closer to Turkey, but he has this level of pragmatism and contacts that allow Egypt also to sort of welcome this development. We've heard news of Cairo wanting to open an embassy in Tripoli, so and UAE very disengaged from the Libya file. And this, of course, is taking place in the context of the Biden administration, where there's less room for unilateral sort of regional policy in Libya. There's more will to put one's weight behind respecting the rules of the game, and I think this is also an important component. So, for these reasons, I'm cautiously optimistic and hope that this transition will move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. So the cautious optimism, I think, is the best phrase that represents the current situation. But I think for the last 10 years, we haven't seen the we have seen cautious for the 10 years, but optimism, I think, is the new development. So let's see. I mean, we are also, optimistic and more. It seems the process is promising, and some of the key potential spoilers, backed from the process. So let's see, and let's cross the fingers. So we will probably have some questions if we can catch up with the time. Thank you, Claudia. So our second speaker is Francois Brug. He's a political scientist and expert on Arab affairs, and he's Emeritus Senior Researcher Fellow at French National Center for Scientific Research. He has been following Libya for a long time, so from the Gaddafi times, he has been historical and political developments. So his depth of knowledge goes back to some of the key periods of Libya. So what we would expect from Francois is also there are some external actors who are closely interested, and there is the geopolitics of Libya. So we know that France, Turkey, Italy, Russia, all the key actors are interested, not just today, but in the past. So we would like you to, situate this geopolitical competition within a broader context and reflect how this new process may be, affected from this geopolitical competition in Libya. Francois.
Thank you so much. Thank you for bringing me in, although I'm no longer, strictly speaking, a researcher on the ground of Libya. It's quite a few years since I have not been there. Nevertheless, this is not my Libyan expertise that I want to mobilize today. Rather, as you have mentioned, my global approach of what has been labeled the Arab Spring, and what should be labeled the counter-revolutionary trend, which has opposed this moment of Libyan, but also Tunisian, Egyptian, Syrian history. So what I would like to, my modest contribution will be, first of all, to say my optimism after what we have just heard and what we have, most of us, read in the report by Claudia, on which fuels this this cautious optimism. It's amazing that there is in the report by Claudia, I read that even Haftar accepted the idea that he was no longer independent actor at the head of his national army. He has accepted to submit to the new political power. So there is a bunch of signals which are very positive, much more. And as you have said, we used to be cautious, but it's not. It's long ago since we would dare say that we were optimists. What I would like to try and underline are the reasons why the supporters, the opponents of the process which has just won, the political process, the process supported by UN, why have they lost? What are the significant moves which have occurred in the field, in the area of the sponsors you did not mention. You mentioned the foreign activists, except the Emiratis. I put the Emiratis in front of everything. Of course, the Emiratis, and of course, I do not forget the French. I do not forget the Russians, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. But the Emiratis are probably the head, the spirit, not in the noble sense of the word, of this process, which has tried to impose upon the very difficult political process which was going on in Libya, a shortcut, a military shortcut named Haftar. Why is it that it failed? Maybe we should recall one first reason. It is the courage and the efficiency of the military resistance by the so-called militias of the West, which have accepted to minor their differences and to unite to support the government in Tripoli. They have to be mentioned. Then we must mention the weakness, the root weaknesses of the Emirati coalition. The Emirati coalition, and you can see this, I follow them in Yemen, and they have the same problem. They have no gut support from the people. They buy support. They create militias. They forge the ideology of the Madkhali militias to fight against whoever they label political Islam, Muslim brothers. But this does not function. The Emiratis had very little support except on a regionalist base. It was the only ideology which had a chance. But they had a very weak ideological base in the East, mobilizing against Faraz and the Tripoli government. Then we had, of course, the efficiency, the extreme efficiency of the military support brought by the Turks, which I will immediately compare with the total inefficiency of the discrete military support brought by the French. No, we do not remember, but in the wake of the offensive on Tripoli, the French had brought in a few dozens of special forces on the ground around Tripoli to help make the bombing of Tripoli by Haftar militias more accurate. So, of course, the efficiency of the Turkish intervention is to be mobilized. Then we have the idea that very slowly the leadership of the Emiratis has been contested. Slowly, Abu Dhabi has been abandoned by most of his supporters for different reasons, which I want to mention now. Of course, Saudi Arabia, for several reasons, has felt that it was easier to reconcile with Qatar. And after this incredible campaign anti-Qatar for 4 years, since June 2017, it was a very strange situation when you have to recognize that you have been in the wrong direction and you make a U-turn. The U-turn, the Emirates didn't support the U-turn, but they had to accept it. In Yemen, the failure of the military strategy, both by the Saudis in the north, bombing the north, or the Emirates trying to create an alternative local political force, recreating the southern independentists because they did not want to ally with Hizb al-Islah, which was considered too close to the Muslim Brotherhood. This has never been mentioned so clearly, but the contradiction of the Emiratis is that they were supposedly putting back in power a regime, a government, Abdurrahman Mansour Hadi, which was mainly supported by those whom they consider at an obsessional level their enemies, Islah was considered as close to Ikhwan Muslimin. Then we have normalization between Israel and the Emirates has played a role that no one has very often mentioned, is that this has made Sisi a little angry. Sisi had the monopoly of dealing with Israel. He had the monopoly of the benefits of being a friend or an ally of Israel. He was the one who was handling Hamas. He was the one who was doing the dirty job of the Israelis at the police or security level in the entire region. And he's been deprived of this monopoly. And Sisi's bad reaction toward the Emirates, tension toward the Emirates, has something to do with this side, which is not so often mentioned. Then we have, the last point would be that many of the Emirates allies and the Emirates themselves have started considering that it was very almost impossible to oppose both Iran and Turkey in the area, the biggest, the strongest players by all means. It was a little too much. So they did not unite in this change, but one by one, Sisi, the Saudis, all one by one went back to some kind of reconciliation with Turkey. So all over, as a whole, we may say that this front, which had been efficient starting 2015-16, when it moved in Libya and realized a few success at the beginning, as split. And I would say this is the main reasons why we are today in a situation to be reasonably optimistic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Francois. So it's really interesting because Emirates somehow find a way to hide themselves. So it is interesting to see they are key actors in Yemen, Libya, affect all the processes, but somehow they can manage to hide themselves. So this is probably one of their success in the field. So we have lots of questions to you, but we will move forward with Tarık Megerisi from ECFR. So Tarık is a policy fellow with the North Africa and the Middle East program at European Council of Foreign Relations. He is a political analyst and researcher who specializes in Libyan affairs. So we've been following his comments, reports closely to understand internal dynamics and some of the issues with regard to Libya. So Tarık, we would also like to hear more about the internal dynamics of the process and your own goals and predictions about the future of the process.
Thank you, Talha, for inviting me here today, and it's it's an honor to be on this esteemed panel. I'll play to the panel's dynamics a bit, and if Claudia was my colleague think tanker who was optimistic, I'll try and balance it out with a bit of pessimism. When this new government was announced and the UN process that carried it, the call around it, and I think that was mentioned by Claudia as well, is that we've seen consensus amongst Libyan politicians on a way forward. But I don't think that there is any real consensus, and if there is, then it's quite superficial. I mean, the roadmap which underpins the new unity authorities, the Presidency Council and the Prime Minister, is essentially paper thin. I mean, there's no checks or controls on them. There is no clear mandate. It essentially just stipulates that elections should be held in December, and it roughly outlines how best it would be to get there. But nevertheless, we have these new authorities, we have these new names, and that is an achievement in and of itself. And I think it's created something of moment of anticipation, you know, whilst the prime minister designate, or however we can refer to him, is putting together his new government. But unfortunately, you know, I would point to a dynamic much like in 2015 and the last UN process, whereby everything seems to be divided by region. And if we take kind of a step back and look at this theoretically or philosophically, the concept of a unity government that is built upon dividing the country and dividing access to the spoils of the country or its revenue generating streams is kind of counterproductive, or you know, it's counterlogical. And I think that in this case especially, you know, after 4 years of division and warfare and civil war, that it's actually counterproductive and quite dangerous to maintain what is, you know, today especially quite a heavily manufactured division upon the country. You know, it creates a dichotomy of East and West, as if there are, you know, these two great political ideologies that are clashing with one another. You know, it creates this idea of good and evil, which is adopted by citizens, you know, in West and East Libya. So, you know, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that creates conflict. Whereas if you scratch the surface and look at it, there are very few real reasons for this division to exist. It is essentially, you know, something that was held in place by Russia's intervention as Haftar's army collapsed, and the notion that we cannot allow what were corrupt or, you know, a deeply unpopular government in Tripoli to essentially continue ruling as it was. And so if we create this division, or we maintain this division, not only does it lend itself towards conflict, but it also creates a cop-out, you know, because Libya's ruling elite, and it is essentially the same political class that has sat in its chair since 2012, it provides them the perfect cop-out, whereby, you know, they can always go and retreat back to their half of the country or their city, blame all the problems of the government on their counterparts and keep the stalemate going, but use their office to create a little fiefdom for themselves. And this is, again, exactly what we saw in 2015. I mean, when the deal was coming over the line, you know, you could point to various names on the Presidency Council and say, oh, look, you know, we have a representative of the East, we have a representative for Haftar, this should all work. But lo and behold, you know, within a few months, the Parliament was refusing to recognize the government. The Presidency Council delegates from the East had been boycotting it. And that framework, that structure remains. In credit, you know, the thing that looks a bit different this time are the individuals themselves. And I think Dabib is a lot more of a savvy politician than Fayez al-Sarraj ever was. And you know, from the initial movements, it looks like he's going to try and build out what is essentially a patronage network through this new government, which means keeping as many people as possible happy. But this also means creating a very large government. And, you know, if, once again, you look at the roadmap which underpins these new unity authorities, this is supposed to be a 10-month interim government focused on the highly technocratic task of holding elections. A huge unwieldy government, a lot of ministerial postings, the notion of a broad work plan which focuses on rebuilding, reconstruction, infrastructure. It suggests that, you know, the guy is not going to leave after 10 months, that he's laying down roots and he's here to stay. And once again, this is something that plays to Libyan political dynamics. And, you know, if we reflect outwards to look at Eastern Libya, I think there are once again some very interesting dynamics that are going on, but which also, you know, are a bit ominous and suggest that if things don't work out, you know, the situation is ripe for deterioration. I mean, the rumors surrounding what happened in Geneva was that, you know, Haftar traded support for Dabeba and for this ticket of Dabeba's in exchange for control over certain ministries. You know, the names are finance and defense ministry, but, you know, it could be broader than that, it could be narrower than that. And if he does get them, you know, if this economic process continues and essentially the debts that Haftar accrued in order to build an army and to launch a war on Tripoli are taken on by those in Tripoli, then it will lead to a lot of friction because there is seemingly no justice for those in Tripoli who underwent the war, and for all of those who have fought Haftar over the last 5 years. But similarly, if he doesn't get his ministries, there might well be conflict, or there might be friction once again, because he will then seek to become a disruptor. And, you know, this is a kind of a shot in the arm for him, because, you know, since Haftar's army collapsed in on itself last June, his local support has been dwindling. You know, Haftar's enterprise was always one that required growth in order to remain coherent. Since he stopped growing and actually shrunk, you know, many of his constituencies in central and eastern Libya have abandoned him. The situation in central Libya grows increasingly tense, given the relationship between a lot of the foreign mercenaries and those who live there. And similarly in Benghazi, the security situation is deteriorating at an alarming rate. I mean, in the last couple of weeks, a lot of security professionals of the city, including the Interior Ministry recently, have come out and essentially lamenting the lack of security, as, you know, tribal-based groups and Salafi-based groups increasingly compete over the levers of the city. And, you know, essentially what we see is that the spoilers are still biding their time. You know, Russia and Turkey remain active on the ground, remain actively pursuing their own policies. Egypt seems to be kind of watching and taking part in the process, but with no promise attached that it's, you know, adapting its approach. And a huge question mark hangs over, you know, what happens if the Egyptians don't get their way? If at the end of the day they do not end up with significant influence over the political process or the security sector reform process, or most of all, if we end up with an army that is under strong civilian control. Will they throw their toys out of the pram? Will they adapt? They are certainly seeming to be more pragmatic. And, you know, for the UAE, which Francois talked about at length, you know, I wouldn't say that they are withdrawing. They just seem to be reverting back to a political strategy, a political policy first. And this is the dominant policy, you know, for the UAE over the last five years. It's only more recently, given the attack on Tripoli, that the military support became really hugely overt and the kind of headline of the policy. I mean, prior to that, it was essentially a quiet approach to undermine the GNA, to undermine the Libyan political agreement that was signed in 2015, and to instead grow Haftar antagonistically to the GNA and the LPA, and to grow this idea of the military or the Libyan Arab armed forces as the dominant political force in the country. And if you kind of track, you know, recent activity on the ground, as well as, you know, the ongoing diplomatic processes such as the economic track, then you'll see that, you know, the Emiratis are just as present and they're just as interested in Libya as they ever have been. You know, I started this off by kind of joking that, you know, I'll balance out Claudia's optimism with a bit of pessimism. But, you know, ultimately after what, 10 years since the revolution, these labels of saying, oh, you're either optimistic or pessimistic are becoming a bit trite, to be honest. You know, there's no real logic to suggest that things can improve if underlying dynamics that drive conflict remain. You know, as I've said over the last few minutes, the country split remains, it's deepening. There is little that's substantive to unify different parts of the country, to unify different parts of the elite or security forces and to bind them together. This, you know, selfish and highly corrupt political elite has only had their legitimacy renewed for another God knows how long by the recent UN process. Haftar and all of those who would like a military authority to rule Libya are still there. They're awaiting a fresh flow of funds with the culmination of the economic track. And, you know, the fractures between groups in East Libya that I've talked about, but also in West Libya, between many of the different militias, political groups, and so on, they remain there and they remain deepening. So, you know, we shouldn't repeat the mistake of 2015 and allow this kind of sense of triumphalism that we had the UN process, which actually manages to get over the line, to ignore the fact that this process is going to need to be micromanaged if it's going to keep moving forwards. It's not optimism or pessimism, it's just realism. Thank you very much, Talha.
Thank you, Tariq. So You highlighted some of the caution side. It's important that the structural foundation, structural elements of the conflict are still there. So it would be difficult to move forward with all these dynamics. So we have some questions, but before getting into Q&A session, we will have our fourth panelist, Dr. Mustafa Aslam. So Murat Aslan is currently teaching at Hasan Kalyoncu University and researcher in the Security Studies Directorate at SETA. So he's a former official. He has important experience in the security sector, and he has published an important book on the security sector reform in Libya. So Murat, we would like to hear more about your analysis of the current situation and possibilities of stability, especially in the security dynamics.
Thank you, Professor. You know, Libyan issue is a bit tiring because we witness events every day trying to assess and obstruct something. But the other day, we have to change what we say or what we think because there are new issues that we can't, take it in account. On the other hand, this issue is not only a Libyan issue. That means Libya is experiencing a crisis after the revolution for many reasons. For instance, this interest of international community is one prominent and valid reason because, as you can see, after the defeat of Haftar, that if international community is committed to find a political solution, then we can achieve it. The second issue, Libya is more than, Libya because East Mediterranean energy politics is really a matter of concern in the region, and countries surrounding this area is usually a playground for the major powers. Well, it was first Egypt. We witnessed a coup d'etat against Morsi, and now Sisi has the power. On the other hand, there's going on a deep, serials of events in terms of gas and relevant economy at the very east of Mediterranean Sea, because Israel is now trying to build a kind of pipeline to Egypt, and Egypt started to convert gas to LNG and will export it to Europe. So in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, Libya may be a kind of picture that conflicts and competition is still going on, but at the backstage, there's also a cooperation of actors. But Libya is more because if you take Turkey and Greece as two players in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, Libya is at the hoop. Because the problem in Eastern Mediterranean Sea is not about gas. It's about sovereignty allegations of the actors. Because if you once drove the lines in the sea in the form of either exclusive zone, economic exclusive zone, then no problem. So it's about sharing. And Libya is important because of the shape of the earth. If Turkey and Libya agrees, and they agreed, on sharing this portion of sea, then Greek will be isolated in their mainland, and Aegean disputes will delay all other problems. Then somebody who is being affected from the Eastern Mediterranean politics will try to shape the Libyan theater. And it did actually like this. On the other hand, what I call it as snowball politics, after the inclusion of Turkish, support to Tripoli government, GNA, everything has changed. Let me ask a question. For instance, assume that Haftar, won the game, the conflict, and reigning in Tripoli upon all Libya. what would happen? Now, we were discussing what Haftar will do in terms of a political process. No, I don't think so. He would be a Gaddafi-like individual, a dictator in Libya. But right after his defeat, now we managed as international community to start a political process and heard the sentiments of a election in a country like Libya, because this country still does not have a political tradition. And actually, this issue is a type of risk, because if you don't know exactly how a political process will be maintained or sustained, then you will face another type of series of problems. Another issue that makes me a bit, concerned is about the great power politics that has reflections in Libya. Well, Russia, it's directly about the security situation. Think that everything has maturated. We have elections. And think that there's a government in Tripoli. Is that a guarantee to have Russians out of Libya? I don't think so. Is that a guarantee that we will have Haftar out of the game? I don't think so. Is that a guarantee that UAE said, okay, I'm done. I will not give you money to finance the mercenaries? I don't think so. So this political process must be augmented first by a clear political assistance that will show Libyans to form up a political party, run for the elections, conduct an appropriate political campaign, and present themselves as a candidate to govern the country. And this issue will be in the agenda for the next 10 to 12 months in case the elections are achieved. Otherwise, we will go back to April 4th, 2019. Regarding security, we have so many challenges on the ground, so many. So I can't say I'm optimistic or pessimistic, but we have to be aware of aware of these challenges. The first one, for instance, when the Libya Political Dialogue Forum was established, armed groups were out. Okay, it's a good starting point for a civilian state. On the other hand, there's a reality on the ground. It is the armed groups that controls individual city centers under the authority of the military councils. So once they feel that they are expelled from the overall, political picture, and with a risk of losing their gaining, that means they are challenged at the very local level. There may be elections countrywide, but in certain regions and in certain cities, there may be some, impediments to prevent political process. Another issue that challenges security is, again, external incursions, because now we had military support to Haftar from France, from, Saudi Arabia, through, Meteli Salafis, or United Arab Emirates, even Greece, even Egypt, and Russians, and Janjaweeds, for instance. No problem what they are or who they are. But it's not clear exactly by what methodology these actors will attempt to achieve their interests in the region. Because there is another fact: Libya is the gate of Africa. Once you have the key, now Africa is either open, or if you don't have the key, it's closed. France, for instance, is really interested. Otherwise, they may have difficulties in reaching the Central African states. Then the political process will be a matter of another competition. And just let me remind one thing: just before the political process, during the negotiations of the committees in different cities, either in Switzerland, either in Egypt or Tunisia, doesn't matter, we have witnessed political figures, individuals or groupings, to go and search for political support in order to have them be more dominant in transitional process or after the elections. Then, if any country who had provided military support to any group will support a political wing, and it's really a matter of, you know, division in country in future. And what about the opportunities? Final thing, I think opportunities are less in comparison to risks and challenges. But I think the, you know, reconciliation of Turkey and Israel and Egypt are clear, will be clear indicators of, you know, providing security in Libya. If these countries agree on a common understanding on addressing the issues in the region, I think, yes, Libya will be more safe. Otherwise, I think incursions will probably more, you know, prone to escalating tensions on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Murat. So, yes, I mean, you mentioned significant security challenges, especially the role of militias and possible securitization of the ground despite the political process. And this is still a challenge we need to tackle. So thank you for these comments. So I would like to thank my presenters. So we have some time to discuss, but we will start with Claudio since she needs to leave within 10 minutes. So Claudio, I have two questions, which is really, you know, also I've been thinking on that. So since this process, LPDF was mainly elite process and relatively successful process, but to what extent this process have impact at the grassroots level? So how it is approached by the Libyan people, and does it really matter for the future of the political stability? And let me ask, you know, one more question. You mentioned the role of incentives, the oil and the central bank and all these issues. So we know that those incentives are important to keep some of the key stakeholders and distributive mechanisms intact. So to what extent do you think these incentives may be successful to keep the elite? I mean, are there other incentives outside of the Libyan context that may spoil this process?
Okay, excellent questions. Thank you. Regarding the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum, I must say that most Libyans still now have not understood how this group of 75 then became 74 because a member unfortunately died in the process. Many of them have not understood how these 74 were selected. And the overwhelming sort of narrative across the country is, we don't know who they are, or, you know, they're not representative, or they're handpicked by the UN. And I fully understand their bewilderment at these names. Unless you've really followed the ins and out of the whole UN-led process starting from Berlin, it was difficult to understand who was there, and also because there was very little clear communication over time as to who these 74 were. But let me say it's a mixed group. It's officially, I mean, there are three main components to this Libyan Political Dialogue Forum. There's a group of House of Representatives group, so 13 members representing the 13 regions of Libya, 13 members of the State Council, so the rival assembly based in Tripoli that was created on the margins of the Skhirat Agreement of 2015. And then the original format for the political dialogue, as conceived of a year ago in the Berlin conference, envisaged 13 independents. So it was supposed to be 13, 13, 13. But then I think the UN realized that only with 13 so-called independents, so people picked by the UN, they wouldn't have had the ability to balance out the 26 members of the two rival assemblies. And there was always the fear that these 26 politicians in power, some since 2012, others since 2014, would have actually, tried to keep the status quo. So there was a need to enlarge this group of independents. And that's why the group of those handpicked by the UN became larger. So it was over 30 at that point. Are they representative? Well, they tried to keep the geographical distribution of Libya well represented. Some key tribes, some key leader, tribal figures are there, political figures. But I think there's a perception that those who are in the room are not heavyweights. And it's not by design that way. It's because the heavyweights didn't want to be in the room. And the heavyweights wanted somebody else that sort of represented them, but wasn't aiming for a political career to be in the room, because there's an unstated commitment that anybody who's part of the dialogue will not run for political office. So yes, it is a elite thing, but I dare say it is politically and geographically representative. The second, and of course, the problem now is that this group of 74 has in its hands the future sort of the political roadmap of the country, because they are now also in charge of fleshing out the legal framework for elections. Maybe the issue of the appointment of the key sovereign positions, so central bank, prosecutor-in-chief, audit bureau, etc., will maybe go back to the forum as well. So it's sort of increasingly going to have potentially an important role. Regarding your questions about the financial incentives, what I said is that their financial incentives, both for the constituencies in Eastern Libya and in Western Libya, to move forward with this deal. But I would say that it's also for some internationals as well. I mean, Turkey, and I mentioned Turkey because this is an event hosted by SETA, I think also needs a fully functional sort of government in Libya to carry out infrastructure projects, to fulfill all those contracts that were signed by previous governments, but payments were never made and the contracts have been frozen. And there's a desire, of course, to boost sort of Libya as an economic partner. And I think that the authorities in Turkey sort of have come to the conclusion that with Serraj government and the malfunctioning of the administration, it's very difficult to have that functioning state that the international community needs. So aside from Turkey, I'd say another, Europe as well, the US, and other numbers of countries want to see Libya as a fully functioning administrative counterpart that they can do deals with. Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, I'm going to soon have to disconnect, so I thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudio. We are looking forward to read your new analysis on the process. Thanks for your contributions.
Thank you.
So, Francois, there's a question to you asking about the role of UAE. So, to what extent do you think the UAE acts to replace Egypt in regional leadership? So, do you think the UAE has such an objective, and or is it because, is UAE trying to replace Egypt, or is it because of fear of revolutionary, from the Arab Spring? So what is the main component or incentive for the UAE's activism, especially in Libya and Yemen?
Allow me, please, first to add a point which I mainly forgot in my intervention. In identifying all those factors which have brought the balance of forces in favor of the opponent of Haftar, of course, there is a new American administration. This has been the adjuvant, the cement, the trigger, whatever. But the atmosphere has changed when, I wouldn't say the new Biden administration, I would say the end of the Trump administration, because no one knew exactly, although Rob Malley is quite well known, and many of us, and most probably Claudia, had reasons to know him. Now, I do not think I'm not so an admirer of the Emirates. In Yemen, what has not been said is that they have a different approach than the Saudis. The Saudis want a quiet southern border. They don't want a regime linked to Iran to be on their southern border. The Emirates have much wider ambitions. The Emirates, if you want to know what the Emirates are dreaming about, you go to Socotra. In Socotra, they have started their dream. Probably you know that the family in charge of the Emirates is originated from Yemen. So they have ancient links with Yemen. They support ambitious programs in Yemen, and they are kind of dreaming of some kind of protectorate in the south of Yemen, which they would control, which would give them control upon the commercial routes around the peninsula. Now, although I do not like them very much, I do not absolutely not consider that they want to substitute to Egypt. They are realistic to the point that they are not willing to oppose a country of 80 million people. Indeed, I think that the trigger of the attitude of the Emirates, you can link it to Khayrat al-Shatir words toward the families in charge of the Gulf monarchies when he said to them, and it was in the Morsi period of Egypt, he said, beware, you might be the next on the list. I think that the hard core of the attitude of the Emirates is fighting against what they call political Islam, which is in fact the main democratic protest in all through the region. I would add the last point is that the ideological dimension of the divisions of Libya, in the frame of the rhetoric of the Emirates, you know, political Islam, fighting against Muslim brothers, has not been a significant one. It exists, but it has not been a significant one at a time when it is a significant one for the poor French who buy the cheap rhetoric of the Emirates. You know, we are going to get the area rid of the lousy Islamists. No, I do consider that the attitude of the Emirates is that they fear regimes which would support those whom they consider their main opponents in the region.
Thank you. Another question about the role of France. So we have seen that there was support, implicit or explicit support to Haftar side, and now there's a new political reality. So to what extent do you think France will accommodate to this new reality and play more constructive role for the political stability with the other actors, especially the external actors in the field?
It has no choice. You know, the issue of Libya is very much linked to the bilateral relations between France and Turkey. Now, if we want to be optimistic, and I have appreciated the intervention of our colleague who has limited our optimism. But if we want to be optimistic, we must consider that the last exchanges between France and Turkey was on the level of, well, let's speak. But it is clear that France has no other choice now. France has taken the measure of what it costs to oppose frontally Turkey in the area. It has failed. It has failed to mobilize NATO partners. It has failed to mobilize European Union partners. So I think that France is moving toward a more realistic understanding of the situation. The Libyan file would be, well, of course, we have lost just remember that we, the French, we were the symbol of the support of the revolutionary camp, and we have these resources we have thrown away by moving upside down sometime in 2014. Thank you to before Macron, we've moved towards supporting Haftar. We have supported Haftar. I repeat it because it has not been said. We have sent special forces during the assault on Tripoli to help make the bombing more accurate. So yes, I do hope that France will be now moving toward a more realistic attitude in this entire problematic of the counter-revolution in this part of the world. We have also supported Sisi to the extent of that we have given to him, the highest rank of Wissam Sharaf, Légion d'honneur, etc., etc. So we have a very extreme position in this situation. It has a cost. We have paid some of the cost. There is a chance that we slowly move to a more rational understanding of the situation.
Thank you, Francois.
Everybody, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Tarek, of course, your cautious remarks are important. I'm also cautious at some point because some key actors are outside of the process. So, for instance, Fatih Bashaga, Akile Salih, Haftar, some of the key other politicians are also outside of the domain. So, to what extent the system may accommodate these, lack of these actors? So, do you think they will play some role? Of course, they will try to spread their influence, but do you think because there is more interest and support from the UN side, from US side, and Europeans are more inclined to support the current process, so do you think they may have similar influence in the coming months on the field? How realistic are we to contain some of these potential spoilers out of the process?
You make a very good point towards the end, which is that the degree to which spoilers spoil is predicated upon the degree to which the United States and Europe and other international actors are focused on Libya or are committed to some kind of a clear solution on Libya. So, for example, we saw in 2015 that when the international community was lined up behind getting the Libyan political agreement signed, it was signed. When their attentions turned elsewhere is when the spoilers came out to play. And similarly, when a new UN process started in late 2017 and 2018, because there was not that strong uniform backing behind it, it was very quickly picked up and subverted and undermined by different UN member states. So, I think we can be relatively confident that at least, for the foreseeable future, we will continue to see concerted attempts by Germany, by Italy, the United Kingdom, the USA, to back this process through. The problem is the idea of what it means to back this process is starting to shimmer a bit. And as a result, it can become very easy to get lost, so to speak. So, for example, we say that, the government of the Dbeiba is going to be announced soon. It will be put towards the House of Representatives, the Libyan parliament, for a vote. And okay, this opens the door for the first round of spoiling. Akile Salih, the speaker of the parliament, is already trying to maneuver in that way. But it looks like the Dbeiba has been savvy enough, including with his choice of presidency council members, to ensure that he will have the majority he needs to get it approved. But the steps after that, what are the expected responses? If the Dbeiba goes the way that is being suggested, and he puts together this huge government, in direct contravention of the advice that the USA and the UK gave him, what is the response going to be? Because those who are backing the UN process need this government to work, so they will feel reticent to a certain degree to want to rain on their own parade. And then there's the issue of the constitutional process, the constitutional underpinning. The Joint Committee of the House of Representatives and the High Council of State failed to provide something adequate. So now it's gone back to the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum. But this is another issue that will be bandied around. And so I think that spoilers will come from all sides here. I mean, you talk about some people being left outside of the process. I think this is true, and it's only going to become more relevant when we know exactly who is left outside. So when the new government is announced, I think at the end of this week, then it will be like the starting pistol for a new round of kind of political maneuvering and jockeying between all the different actors. And then going forward, I think we're going to see another inflection point around whenever it is that it becomes unavoidably clear that Dbeibeh is not interested in holding elections, because that will be a point of grievance which I think any of the opposition groups to him will seek to latch onto. And just to close, I think it's important to remember that, you know, the shock to the system that I think got a lot of local support behind the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum, or the notion of it before people saw what it became, was the protest movement over August. I think it was late August, early September. So, you know, despite all of the talk from the elites of this East-West divide, the protest was across, you know, all cities. The demands of the protesters were similar. It was about corruption. It was about the elite. It was about, you know, lack of electricity. And yeah, I think if the situation worsens and Dbeibeh looks like he's going to be another Sarraj, then I think we'll see this popular support come out once again, and everybody will seek to harness it.
Thank you. Another short question. Something worrying me is there are some major human rights violations, and we have seen that in Tarhuna, Sirte. So, and oftentimes I think they are avoided under these conditions. So, how do you think do you think there will be some broader investigation, or some people will be found accountable for all these violations? So what is your comment on this?
It's a difficult subject. You know, unfortunately, I think the concept of justice has been removed entirely for the sake of political expediency from the current political process. I mean, I spoke in my introductory remarks about you know, the lack of substance underpinning the current agreement, and transitional justice, as well as the notion of accountability, I think is entirely absent, which I believe is a real shame, because if you look at the current of conflict in Libya, but also the kind of the destabilizing dynamics in Libya, the driving force for them is injustice, or is, you know, unsatisfied grievances. You know, that was what brought Libyans out to protest in 2011. That's what drove both sides. You know, even the Libyans who fought for Haftar and who attacked Tripoli, these were groups who have been outside since 2011 and were looking for a way back in. And, you know, every fresh conflict, every fresh corrupt government just piles grievance upon grievance. And so until we have some form of national reconciliation, some form of transitional justice, and, you know, those outside powers who assist Libya, you know, with resolving their political, their security and their economic troubles, also try to help them resolve these questions of accountability, you know, perhaps by providing them forums for justice outside of their own country, whilst, you know, Libyans are unable to secure courts. You know, we saw the concept of universal jurisdiction applied excellently in the case of Syria, but never in the case of Libya. You know, we've had the ICC been active in Libya, but their own investigations have been curtailed and have been dampened by member states who we would really expect better from. And so, you know, there's one anecdote which I think sums up this lack of interest. After the Berlin conference in January, there were all these, follow-up working groups created, and everybody scrambled, to head the security or the political or the economic working groups, but nobody wanted to lead the human rights one and the accountability one. In fact, there was such little interest in it that they had to bring in 2 countries who weren't part of the Berlin conference, the Netherlands and Switzerland, in order to run that working group. And until we address that, I fear we just go round and round in circles.
Well, I think it will take some time to bring this issue forward. But thank you for your comments. So we will continue to communicate on this issue. Thanks for your contributions. So Murat, I have some concerns. I mean, we know that certain countries, so some Russian elements, Emirati elements, Egyptian elements, and also Turkish elements are on the field. So some people may consider this as an obstacle for stability and future. But what do you think? I mean, do you think these actors may stay in Libyan fields without engaging into military confrontation? Do you think they may reduce their military potential and continue to play more constructive role? What is your comment on this? So how are they gonna stay on the field, all these actors?
Thank you. I think it depends on the expectations of the actors and also the course of the course in Libya in terms of political developments and a political solution, elections to be held, and achievements. Once elections are achieved and there's a government in Tripoli that is totally, favored by the Libyan public with a majority, I think state actors in Libya are totally dependent on the choice of the legitimate government. If legitimate government says go, then Russia, Turkey, or another state should go. That's it. Because Turkish military presence in Libya is, bound by an agreement between GNA and Turkey, and GNA is the legitimate representative of the Libyans. But if someday GNA says, okay, we are done, thank you for your service, and we want to be alone afterwards, then Turkey will say yes. On the other hand, I'm not sure about Russia. Because once Russia steps up in a region and has a footprint of a military boot, they tend to stay there forever, as you can see in Syrian case. And that's the concern. And that's why the United States is really insistent on reaching a compromise in Libya and having Russians out. So yes, it's a problem and it will be a problem, but not for Turkey, because Turkey is, Turkey complies with the agreements. Legitimacy is the first principle that Turkish foreign policy is totally, applies to everything. So that's all from me, but there are many questions as I see. If you want, I can answer them, or you can ask.
Yeah, I mean, there is another question. So there is the potential that the EU may have some sanctions against Russia due to some recent confrontations. So to what extent these potential sanctions and potential confrontations may affect Russian position in Libya and the Eastern Mediterranean? So what is your reflections on this?
I think there are some inconsistencies regarding sanctifying any state. Russia is in Libya, and as you may know, CAATSA law of the United States is applicable to the countries cooperating with Russia and Iran. But okay, when Turkey procured S-400, the United States applied it. On the other hand, United Arab Emirates is closely cooperating with Russia and paying huge amounts of money to Russian mercenaries. So we didn't hear any American voice to apply any sanction to UAE. For EU, I think it's not that much easy to sanctify Russia. because they are dependent on Russian energy. Once it erupts as a crisis, then EU must be prepared for lacking energy resources. Okay, Eastern Mediterranean has started to produce some amount, though it's not adequate. There are pipelines passing by Turkey, okay, but still Europe needs more. And Americans are eager to sell more LNG to European markets, but they need alternatives. I think EU will think twice in terms of sanctifying Russia.
Mm-hmm. So, do you think the Russian presence in the Eastern Mediterranean will be more persistent in the coming period? So,
actually, you know, they will be in Syria for 49 years. And if you rent a base or a portion of land in a country for 49 years, you will be there forever. That's my understanding. So they guaranteed, you know, their presence in Syria. But for Libya, it's still fragile for Russia. If international community has only one solid sound opposing Russian presence in Libya, I think now we can achieve it. Otherwise, they will be in. But they want concessions. You know, that's very clear. They want economic concessions, for instance, in Libya. They want to have business. You know, I think Russia is in Eastern Mediterranean Sea already. So we must prevent Libya. This is my perception.
Thank you. So I would like to thank all my panelists and for their valuable contributions. So definitely the issue of Libya, Eastern Mediterranean will continue to be a significant issue. So what is important for the moment is, I think, 1.5 years ago, some actors were considering trying to reach for a military solution in Libya. So those efforts have failed. So the positive side is that now UN-supported political process has been initiated. So of course there are some risks, there are some elements of uncertainty. However, moving forward with the political process, negotiation process, and incorporating both domestic and international actors would be a significant component of the stability in Libya. It will be very difficult, but for the moment, I think we can see some optimistic side despite all these uncertainties. So I think we are probably better than 2 years ago, but there are lots of uncertainty. So hopefully we will see a better, more peaceful future for Libya. So I would like to thank all participants, the people who sent us their questions, and also our panelists. Thank you. I would like to say